Hi everyone. So before this video starts, or whatever this is, I just want to put a disclaimer that if it sounds for the next video for the what is English for these next videos, I'm gonna sound like I'm choking on oxygen, and you're probably wondering why. And all I gotta say is that's because I am. I have a really bad fever right now, but you know what? I'm a trooper and I push through, and that's on what? That's on period. That's on what? That's on Lord Byron. That's on what? That's on English for DC. And that's all I gotta say. So bye.
The Destruction of Sennacherib by Lord Byron. The Assyrian came down like the wolf on the fold, and his cohorts were gleaming in purple and gold, and the sheen of their spears was like stars on the sea, when the blue wave rolls nightly on the deep Galilee. The first stanza tells of an Assyrian king by the name of Sennacherib who is marching toward the city of Jerusalem. Lord Byron describes that he does this in a manner similar to a wolf preparing to attack a flock of sheep. The king's army wears shiny purple and gold armor, with spears as luminous as the reflection of stars and constellations on the sea. Lord Byron compares this reflection to the biblical Sea of Galilee, a region of today's northern Israel, where Jesus is said to have walked on water. Frequent biblical references will be made throughout this poem, for it centers around God's might and will. Moving on to the second stanza. Like the leaves of the forest when summer is green, that host with their banners at sunset were seen. Like the leaves of the forest when autumn hath blown, that host on the morrow lay withered and strown. The second stanza further depicts the arrival of the Assyrian army into Jerusalem. The Assyrians showed up like green summer leaves in the distance, and had banners that were visible at sunset. However, the next day they looked like autumn leaves, scattered and depleted by the wind. Lord Byron uses this description as a metaphor to tell of the Assyrians' failure to capture the city of Jerusalem. Sennacherib and his army began proud and prominent, hoping to siege a city they believed belonged to them. The third stanza is utilized to explain why they were ultimately defeated. For the angel of death spread his wings on the blast, and breathed in the face of foe as he passed, and the eyes of the sleepers waxed deadly and chill, and their hearts but once heaved, and forever grew still. So this is where the rest of the poem just gets really gory, like Game of Thrones time level. The third stanza tells of the angel of death who flew down while the army was sleeping. The poem states that the angel breathed directly into the faces of the Assyrians, and then they died in their sleep. Must have been some nasty breath, I guess, because the next day their eyes looked cold and lifeless. To make the scene even more intense, the poem says that the Assyrian army's hearts beat one last time in defiance to the angel of death, and then they just stopped beating forever. But people weren't the only thing that were dead, and Lord Byron makes sure we know that in the fourth stanza. And there lay the steed with his nostril all wide, but through it there rolled not the breath of his pride, and the foam of his grasping lay white on the turf, and cold as the spray of the rock-beating surf. The fourth stanza paints a picture of a horse who is dying and laying on the ground with wide nostrils. Kind of like mine. The horse's nostrils are not wide, however, because he is vigorously breathing, though. It's because he's dead. The horse is similar to how the Assyrian army is mentioned. The horse is no longer a force of nature and proud. It's dead. That's not all though. The horse, or as the poem states, literally has foam coming out from his dying breaths, which have all collected on the ground around him. The horse's foaming breath is as cold as the foam on the waves in the ocean. But every horse, however, needs a rider. On to the fifth stanza. And there lay the rider, distorted and pale, with the dew on his brow and the rust on his mail. And the tents were all silent, the banners alone, the lances unlifted, the trumpet unblown. So basically, the rider of the horse lays dead nearby, but in a contorted and irregular position with pale skin. Lord Byron goes on to describe how the morning dew has already started to gather on his forehead, and that his armor is already beginning to rust. The surroundings were silent now. There was no noise from the army's tents, and there was no trumpet or banner held up. But what about the families at home, you ask? Well, Lord Byron doesn't leave that out either. On to stanza 6. And the widows of Asher are loud in their wail, and the idols are broke in the temple of Baal, and the might of the Gentile, unsmote by the sword, hath melted like snow in the glance of the Lord. Lord Byron ends the poem in Asher, the Assyrian capital. The wives of the dead soldiers are said to have wept loudly for their past husbands. The statue of their deities in the temple of their highest god, Baal, has also been destroyed. The power of these non-Jewish individuals had vanished. However, man-made physical weapons did not take this strength away from them. It was gone almost instantaneously, like how God quickly melts snow. Oh my god. Okay. Essentially, the destruction of Sennacherib has an overarching topic of God's might and will. More specifically, however, it discusses the result of his intervention. Stanzas 3 and 5 highlight how God's power isn't loud and overdramatic like how the Assyrians attempt to display their dominance. God's intervention is subtle, silent, but nonetheless it is extremely impactful and effective. God's might defeats all earthly power and military warfare. So basically, don't try and fight God or you'll be foaming on the ground. In light of death, the poem also discusses one's morality and accepting one's fate. Stanzas 2 and 5 most prominently highlight scenes of gruesome suffering and the wavering of one's morality. Lord Byron accompanies these scenes, however, with metaphors and similes of nature, which perpetuate that the Assyrian army was facing an issue that we all must encounter: death, and how it is natural and that it comes sooner or later, sisters.